All right, boys, here's the plan. Jaden, I need you to blow the door on my mark and clear the way for us. Then, Lawerence will take the shot and neutralize the target. Clear?
Got it, boss. Now, was it red, green, red, or red, green, green, red?
And he's supposed to be the demolitions expert.
Welcome to Lore Party, the podcast that explores the stories, characters, and universes of our favorite video games. I'm Connor.
I'm Lawerence.
And I'm Jaden.
And we have a special episode coming up for you here. I'm very excited to talk about some of my favorite clone troopers in the entire Star Wars canon, the one and only Delta Squad. These guys are the baddest of the bad, and they are the stars of probably, maybe, it's up there, one of my favorite Star Wars games ever made. Star Wars Republic Commando came out in 2005, I believe, and it's a classic.
So long ago.
In a galaxy far away, no doubt.
A long, long time ago, and very far, far away, that's right. But it took place in a very interesting time in Star Wars history, the Clone Wars, obviously. And, you know, when the Clone Wars rolled along, the Republic knew they needed a special breed of troopers to do the dirty jobs that the rank and file weren't cut out for. Thus, the Commandos were created. They were kind of bred and trained and raised in four-man teams, squads, and they operated as very close-knit units, almost as a family, a band of brothers, if you will. And Delta Squad were a prime example of everything great about the Republic Commandos. Most of all because of their unique personalities that came out during the game and in the various stories that they appeared in. From a gameplay perspective, I think it would be very, very boring if all four characters of a squad-based shooter kind of acted the same, sounded the same, behaved the same, and they were just identical suits of armor. So luckily, that's not what we got in Republic Commando. We got Boss, Fixer, Scorch, and Sev. They were individuals. They were unique men with their own kind of inclinations and quirks. They all had preferences. They brought the team to life in a lot of ways.
So, before we get started, I have to ask, who's your favorite Delta Squad member?
It's a tough one. I'm probably going to have to go with Boss, though. You know, the man in charge, because he is voiced by Tamara Morrison, Jango Fett himself, and you can't beat that. That's pretty awesome.
What about you, Jaden?
I'm gonna have to go with Boss as well. I mean,
Copycat.
I know, but he's just kind of the best. I mean, he was the definitive voice of the Clone Troopers, although for me, that kind of got overshadowed by the later Clone Wars TV show series that I consider the voice actor for the Clone Wars series to be the definitive voice now, but that's just because I've heard him so much now. Or D. Bradley Baker.
Oh yeah, he's awesome too.
He's great, sure. Which is why I loved how in Battlefront they have both voices at the same time. I think that's awesome.
Well, you guys both picked wrong because the best member is Scorch.
That's fair.
I knew you'd like Scorch.
He's got the best hot takes, and he is he best represents me.
Oh yeah, I can see that. You're quick with the witty observations as well, just like Scorch is.
Yes, you can't see it, but I'm giving you the finger guns right now.
He's even introduced to the player during the game as quote unquote the heart and soul of your squad. He kind of like keeps Delta grounded a little bit. He keeps them, you know, on task in a fun way, and he's a clever dude. He's fun to be around. The team would not be complete without a guy like Fixer, though. Delta 40. He's more or less the second in command. He's kind of like the teacher's pet a little bit. He's always like, "Hey, cut the chatter, you know, stay focused." He's so stern and by the book, and it's like, yeah, he's a bit of a killjoy, but it's hard not to like him, for me at least.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're not a fan.
I don't know. Like, he's kind of a jerk, but you know, hey, everybody has their spot in Delta Squad. And then, you know, last but not least, we got our boy Sev.
I was just about to say, no love for Sev?
The psycho.
No, there's no love for Sev.
I love Sev. Sev is awesome. He's a little creepy, but I like him.
Little creepy. Yeah, a little creepy. I'm putting that in quotes. I mean, I feel like the game just didn't respect Sev either, but yeah, Sev is definitely mentioned last on purpose.
The fiercest hunter of all your brethren is how he's introduced, and that's very apt. He honestly, boil it down, he just loves to kill. He's just a bloodthirsty guy.
Yeah, they pulled him out of the tank, killing people. Like, it's incredible.
He came out of the cloning vats with a knife in his hand.
The Commandoans pulled him out. They're like, "Oh, we didn't give him that knife, did we?"
Where'd that come from? But yeah, you mentioned he's not respected, Lawerence. That's we'll remember that. We'll get back to that. But I do think that the most memorable part of this game for me is just the relationship between these four troopers, these brothers who form an elite fighting force, and that's what we're getting into today. We want to talk about how these are guys cloned and created from the same genetic template. They're clones of the same man. They're meant to be identical, but they're anything but. When you get to know them and you fight with them and work with them, they really emerge as unique personalities. So we wanted to, kind of get into where that comes from and how that makes them special as characters and as a plot device in a otherwise straightforward shooter game. Let's get into how personalities can kind of appear when you're talking about clones. We've talked about clones before here on Lore Party, but specifically in regards to Delta Squad, I find it curious. They set themselves apart from each other pretty quickly early on in their training. And Jaden, I think you can give us a better idea of what they actually went through during their training.
Yeah. So one of the big things that sets them apart from the regular rank and file clone troopers, they were all trained on their standard programs, but the commandos were actually trained by Mandalorian mercenaries who were hired by Jango Fett because of their skill sets, and they were organized into groups of 4 and told, hey, this is your instructor. He's going to teach you how to be a squad, how to be true Mandalorians. In fact, the Republic Commandos, they were almost more Mandalorian than clone trooper by the end of the war. Some of the Mandalorian teachers, they would teach them how to speak Mandoid. They would teach them, the warrior's code and all that stuff. But the Delta Squad, their trainer was a man by the name of Wulan Vao, and he was considered one of the more brutal instructors. He was kind of a dick, which is why Sev is kind of a dick. Sev is the only one in the group that was like...
They were all pretty brutal, though, so that's saying something.
Yeah,
right?
They were all just... this was the hardest training ever. And then on top of that, there you got Val, who's like, I'm just going to make it 10 times worse. And Sev was apparently the only one who was actually grateful for the training, which should tell you that he's a psychopath.
Yeah, that seems about Sev.
Right. Isn't something Waylon Val said, something along the lines of, you can't prepare a soldier for war unless you make him stare death in the face, something like that. The
quote is, you can't breed soldiers with flash learning and simulation. They must come face to face with death itself.
There it is. Yeah. And come face to face with death they did. They were really thrown directly into the crucible, as it were, when the Clone Wars kicked off early on, as early as the Battle of Geonosis, that we see in episode 2. Delta Squad and many other units of Republic Commandos were kind of tossed into the battle on Geonosis a little haphazardly. Maybe we could get into like how maybe the Commandos were misused in that situation, but suffice to say, they saw some really brutal combat. They took the brunt of some of the worst of that conflict throughout their careers.
But they kept surviving and kicking ass.
That's right.
If you want to look at the bigger picture, the Battle of Geonosis, while it's a victory for the clones, it's actually like a horrible defeat because the entire clone army was engaged on Geonosis at that point, and they lost like a third of their soldiers in that battle.
That's pretty messed up.
Which just shows you how terrible Jedi are to generals. We'll get into that later.
That's a whole other episode, I'm sure.
Not to quote Futurama, at all, but it just reminds me of the Zap Brannigan thing.
Oh,
where it's
yes.
like I sent wave after wave of my own men at the killbots because they had a predetermined kill limit.
Expert strategy. That's what we call a pro gamer move.
General Krell and Zap Brannigan would have a nice drink together.
That's true. The Jedi were just trying to pull off a pro gamer move. That's all. We just don't understand it. We're not high IQ enough.
Exactly.
But that leaves us with Delta Squad itself and kind of the question of how exactly their personalities emerged. We discussed their training. You know, that's actually a great point that Jaden raises. The fact that Delta, as well as the other commando units, were given very hands-on, individualistic training. They weren't trained in huge, like, platoon, battalion level groups. It was just the 4 of them and their one instructor. And that really instilled in them, like Whale and Val wanted, it really instilled in them a sense of, these are your brothers. These 3 men around you are all you have to rely on. They are fingers on your hand. They are the organs in your body. They are the other parts of yourself. So it instilled a huge, very fierce sense of loyalty among them. And I think it's my personal kind of contention that really encourages the members of Delta Squad to kind of set themselves apart, stand out, bring something unique to the situation that the other members of your squad don't.
Right. Like, they work as one cohesive unit. Like, together, they're like one soldier that's just broken into separate parts.
Right. And there's also the factor of just kind of their engineering to begin with, how they're created to begin with, is that commandos are kind of designed and bred to be more creative and individualistic than the standard frontline troopers. It's part of their genetic makeup and part of their mission profile to think outside the box. It's kind of a combination of how they're trained, how they're raised, and even just how they were created to begin with. That kind of makes them what they are and encourages the development of unique personalities.
Right. They're kind of like the Marines of Star Wars clone troopers, in a sense. Or special ops, maybe. It's probably better.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're definitely the behind enemy lines, operate with limited, oversight and support. And you can't just send standard troopers on missions like that. They won't know what to do. So you need commandos to be very self-sufficient. They need to have a strong sense of self to do what they do.
And I think we might cover this later too, but I think what makes Delta Squad stand out, I guess, in the Star Wars universe is more like you could make a specialized clone trooper that's just really, really good at one thing. It's the fact that they also have like these unique personalities that are tied to those skills. So they're not always serious and by the book.
Right.
Scorch, for instance, got his name for blowing up, fucking up an explosive and burning off some eyebrows.
Right.
And is just like, he quotes rules to be like funny and ironic. But like, he's still very specialized in explosives, where you could, breed a trooper that's just like basically like a droid and they're just really good at blowing stuff up, but they have like the personality and the I guess just the personality to go along with it that I think builds that team dynamic.
That's an interesting point. You actually see that in the game as well. Like you said, Scorch has a personal affinity for explosives. He just loves blowing stuff up. Sev is the marksman of the team. He lives for that kill shot and lining up a long distance kill. He loves it. So he's the designated sniper. Fixer is very technical. He likes to make machines do what he needs to do. He's slicing into computers and stuff like that. He's an expert at that. So they all have kind of predilections and preferences for certain things. They have skills that are innate to them and that they find fulfillment in a lot of ways. But at the same time, they're commandos. They're trained to be very versatile. So you can still have Sev, wire a bomb. You can still have Scorch hack a door. You can still have Fixer, take up a sniping position. And they're all equally effective in all those roles. So it's like, that just speaks to their personalities too. Like, I can do pretty much anything the team needs me to do, but I like this specific job. So it's interesting. It's once again speaks to these unique motivations that they have, and these things that set them apart as individuals. And Boss himself, it comes down to him. he's made and born to make those decisions, kind of delegate, you do this, you do that, call the orders, call the shots. And they're all basically just doing what they were made to do. But the difference is, like you pointed out, Lawerence, they're not just doing what they're made to do. They're also enjoying it in some way or another.
Right. And it goes like, you even see that with just their names. Like,
right.
They're getting their name. They're, they have these designations. You have a code designation as a clone trooper, but then you get this name based off of some unique trait or something like dumb or fun that you've done.
Right.
One of my favorite examples of naming is not from this game, but from the universe itself. One of the clone troopers in Domino's squadron always got killed first in their simulation, so they named him Droid Bait.
Young clone troopers can be so cruel. They're like school children.
The meanest thing in the world. Like, I don't have a name. Your name is Guy Who Dies First.
It's pretty dark.
By the way, these are his friends who gave him this name. It wasn't like
right.
They're just so tired of him getting killed every time.
Right, these are people who like you. God, they're a grim bunch, these troopers. But that speaking of Jaden, I was curious about something else we wanted to get into here was examples of other clones with unique personalities. It's not just the Commandos, it's not just Delta Squad. They are kind of the topic here, but for context's sake, there are characters all over the canon who happen to be clones of Jango Fett. They're part of the Grand Army of the Republic, but they really developed their own personalities and motivations throughout the war. There's, Captain Rex, a big part of the Clone Wars cartoon series. Commanders such as Gree, Cody, Wolf, they all kind of became individuals. But I wanted to ask you, what other examples do you have of clones that sort of developed their own personalities throughout the war in different ways?
Well, one of the big ones that I can remember, there's two squads that I always talk about. There's the Domino Squadron, which is one of my favorites, but it's kind of a tragic group. And they kind of lead into the 501st Legion, which is, of course, Anakin Skywalker's clone battalion, later on Vader's Fist. There's a great episode arc in the Clone Wars where you see Domino Squadron getting trained, and each one of them has individual personalities already there, based on the fact that they're the worst clone squadron to go through training, which is really funny to me.
Right, they're the rejects, basically.
There's those guys, and they the survivors of that group, they get sent to the research station. They're guarding that research station, and then they get wiped out. Poor Droid Bait ends up getting droid baited, because of course he does.
He lives up to his name.
He's literally the first one to die in the episode, and it's my favorite thing in the world that's his name. Like, why would
get some F's in the chat for Droid Bait?
Oh, poor Droid Bait. And then we see from there they actually get accepted into the 501st. The survivors do, anyways, and you actually see that the squadron of the 501st, they're unique just from the fact that they kind of become unorthodox themselves after working with Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, who we all know is a very unorthodox person himself. In fact, during the Umbara arc, Anakin Skywalker's been recalled to Coruscant, and they get a new general, and General Krell, who just goes, "Hey, clones, run at that wave of enemies like you are normally supposed to do." And they all go, "Wait, what? That's not what we do here. We're the 501st. We come up with wacky ways to get out of these situations." He's like, "I don't care. Run at those explosions. Die for me." And they actually get reprimanded because they come up with creative ways to get around the defenses. Like, they steal enemy fighters, fly them up, and blow up a capital ship controlling the droids, and they land, and the general's like, "You guys disobeyed orders. You're going to the firing squad."
Wow.
And they're like, "But this is what we're supposed to do. We're the 501st. We come up with wacky scenarios."
See, I think one of my favorite examples is also from Domino Squad. It's just Heavy.
Oh, Heavy.
He didn't survive the initial introduction of them, but like you see him grow from like he doesn't necessarily have like a leader's personality. He's more of a hothead. He's like kind of a mix of Sev and Scorch. Like, he's more hot-blooded, and he's looking for action. And I think like he hates that he's on this outpost because he doesn't see it as being important, even though he comes to realize it is important. And he makes an ultimate sacrifice for the rest of his team, but you see him go from just like kind of like hot-blooded, like just jackass, to just shows a lot of leadership qualities, and he makes the ultimate sacrifice. So he's unique in a way where like he starts one way and ends another way, which I think it shows that clones in general are more dynamic.
Right. And that leads me to a thought I had. We're talking about Delta Squad as a family unit as well as a fighting unit who, all develop their own personalities and they have a very unique bond. But through these other examples, I think we're seeing that individualism among clone troopers is almost inevitable. Delta Squad had, their own training regimen, and they were bred in a specific way to come out a certain way. But looking at all the stories of clone troopers that grew into their own and became individuals and, formed bonds with each other, it's almost like the breeding and the training are kind of not necessarily irrelevant, but they're not the end all be all.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think it's the experiences and in and outside of battle, I think that ultimately define the way like a clone becomes.
The example that I would give is, you have 10 people in a room, each one of them sits down to eat their meal. They don't all do the same thing. One person might sit down, he might eat the potatoes first. The next person might eat the steak first. The third person might take a drink of his water and then drink the water so long that the steak gets cold. And therefore his meal tastes terrible versus the buddy next to him who ate the steak when it was still hot.
That was very profound.
That's deep, man.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
Jedi Master Jaden over here.
That's right.
Now when I eat my steak first, I'll think of you.
Aw, thanks, man. That's what I was hoping for. Now I'm hungry. What were we talking about?
All right, we're going to keep this conversation going, but first, a quick break.
We interrupt this podcast for a preview for a different podcast. I'm Bruce, a regular contributor to Lore Party. In the unforgiving world of the gods, there is an endless, vicious cycle of fathers killing sons, brothers killing brothers, and sons killing mothers. But Kratos, the ghost of Sparta, looks to end that cycle with his son Atreus, as they journey through the various realms of the Norse pantheon. Tune into our God of War episodes where my co-host Abu and I discuss the latest installment in the God of War series from 2018 and the insightful ways the game creates more depth in a beloved franchise. Just check out our Lore Party feed and search God of War. It should be easy to find. We now continue your regularly scheduled podcast.
So, regardless of how they were bred, how they were raised, were they destined to kind of take on their personalities no matter what? Like, let's say, hypothetically, Delta Squad was raised in a really peaceful setting. They weren't even soldiers. They were just kind of cloned from Jango Fett and then, raised in like a generic kindergarten and like, hey, go play outside. They weren't given weapons and trained how to fight together. Would they still kind of develop those personal characteristics? Like, would Boss still be kind of an analytical, tactical thinker? Would Fixer be really, focused on his goals and kind of, by the numbers and serious? Would Sev still be really competitive and maybe psychopathic? Would Scorch still be a funny guy? It's like interesting to think about. We've gotten into this a little bit before, but is individualism among clones inevitable, or are they purely products of their environments and their circumstances?
See, I think that what you would see in those situations wouldn't necessarily be the same personality, but I do think that we would see something similar and that there would be differences between them. Because I think the fact that we have clones that are the Delta Squad, it's two-part. One part is they're specialized in some form of combat, and then the second part is they've got this like oddly specific or unique personality trait that goes along with it. But I think the fact that they have different personalities than one another also shows that they would be different in these situations. Like, I don't necessarily know if their personalities would match their situations. Like, I think that Scorch would still be like kind of sarcastic and like wisecracking asshole. It's just that he'd be a sarcastic wisecracking asshole in a different setting, like probably less explosives, but
hopefully,
like, you know, he's working at like Space Home Depot, just really ragging on his boss or a new employee or something.
Right. It's hard to picture, but that's kind of where the evidence leads us, I guess. To me, that kind of speaks to what I think is the strength of many of the best Star Wars stories. I personally feel like the best Star Wars stories out there are all about self-determination and kind of finding your place in the galaxy, even if you have to fight for that place. And to me, Delta Squad specifically, they're a great example that proves that even if you were born with a specific purpose and you were created as a copy of another person, you can still become a unique individual in your own right. And it's kind of like you find your own path, even if it fits on a path that was predetermined for you, you make it your own in some way or another.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Like, you know, I mean, to some extent, Delta Squad, even though they're specialized, they're clones, so they were, you know, made to be expendable. And I think that clones kind of know that, but even so, like, you know, we mentioned earlier that Sev was, you know, the game didn't respect Sev. I mean, Sev gets overwhelmed and is missing in action, but immediately when he radios out, their first instinct is to go and help Sev. It's not like, you know, this is what you were made for. Like, sorry.
Right.
You know, this is a really disciplined squad. They do take orders well, but they were like all prepared to run, you know, back into enemy territory and, you know, find their brother and bring him back or die trying.
That's a great point about how on some level they all understand that they are made to be expendable. Like, they kind of accept that. That's part of the job to them. Like, yeah, this line of work, this life that we have in front of us could very easily, will probably kill us at some point. But when faced with the situation of, hey, our brother is in trouble, and they're given the order, hey, move on, you need to rally, and, you know, you have work to do. It's put to them, this entire operation, it's on Kashyyyk at the time. It's like a battle of Kashyyyk is starting, and they're told this entire operation can't be jeopardized because of one commando. And Scorch's response is, he's talking about my pod brother there. It's like, you think that's just one commando, but that's a quarter of our family you're talking about. So it's high stakes. Yeah, like they take orders, they take their orders seriously, they take their mission very seriously, but that brotherhood, that bond between them is kind of above all, and it underlines everything else about their lives.
Right.
And I do believe Delta Squad was so effective in the field and in their missions because of their unique personalities. I think those personalities were strengths, not liabilities. You know, we hear talk all the time about in combat situations, emotions are, you know, a risk. You can't afford them. But I think Delta Squad proved that their emotions they can be powerful. They can be a resource for you. The chemistry that they shared with each other, their creativity and their individualism, I think, forged an unbreakable bond that saw them through all the chaos and violence that the galaxy could throw at them. Well, that about wraps it up. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please take a second to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us grow the show. And be sure to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at @lore_party. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.